In this video, I'll be talking about kind of the role of Latin in Warhammer and sketch out some of the basic characteristics of Warhammer language. Fair warning, there'll also be a small rant on pronunciation. Okay, so this fine-looking sow is called Pigus oincus. Isn't he a fine-looking Igpay? Pig Latin is a method by which you make normal words sound like Latin by changing and adding vowels. The Latin in Warhammer isn't quite that. It's something a little more different, a little more nuanced, a little more playful and intelligent. And it's been my intention to launch an in-depth analysis of the language of Warhammer and its kind of historical reference and original meaning ever since my videos discussing the origin of demon and the pronunciation of elf or elf in Age of Sigmar. Warhammer often incorporates direct, authentic Latin, but the meaning and context is different. In the earliest days of the company, there were actually a number of employees that loved the language and knew a lot about the classics. Now that still remains today. Often when you do watch the interviews of Games Workshop employees, a lot of them do come from the classics. But you can actually see, very much authentic Latin phrases painted onto early tanks and banners in some of the original art from the 80s and 90s. Now as the company grew and the personnel of the company grew with it, kind of the use of Latin became a little less authentic and a little more playful, right? There's lots of words that seem like they're appropriate but actually have no authentic use within the language. Kind of the meaning has changed over time. So sometimes you'll see words that look and sound like Latin, but they don't actually exist at all. But there's still enough here that we can have some fun exploring kind of this context and kind of the historical references that they are referring to and how they add flavor to 40k in Age of Sigmar. Now I don't know how people feel about the use of language in Warhammer, but speaking for myself, as someone that has studied a lot of philosophy and history and classics, the use of Latin to describe so much of the 40k universe is a primary reason for my loyalty to the brand. There are a couple other model companies that use a little bit of Latin here and there, but Warhammer is saturated with it, and I love it. That's honestly one of the reasons I love the game. There are, of course, other linguistic influences within Warhammer, but Latin is fairly dominant. You can see it in all the words that end in IUS or US, kind of invoking the spirit of Augustus, Julius, Tiberius, and others. And often these are kind of names and references directly taken from the pages of history. The whole world of language in 40k is separated into High Gothic, the kind of pseudo-Latin tongue, and the Low Gothic, or Common Speech. Now this is the core context of both the Adeptus Astartes, which is High Gothic, and Space Marine, which is Low Gothic. And Forge World and its heavy emphasis on kind of the cult mechanicus and Titan legions actually tends to take a little more reference from the Greek world and tend to lean a little more in the direction of ancient Greek when it takes its kind of linguistic references. So a little more of the kind of endings in OS as kind of slight cultural difference here. So perhaps a little more foreign in its feel. And again, very creative use of language to slightly differentiate between the cultures of Mars and Terra, that kind of that union and alliance that makes the Imperium. In the same way that kind of the Greek and Roman world became kind of one historically. So you're going to see some videos on this topic diving into the historical references and etymology of specific words, faction by faction. So to break down etymology itself, we'll be studying the eudaimon, kind of the true sense of something, while also participating in a logia, the study of or discussion of a topic. And anytime you see ology, it doesn't matter if it's in biology or psychology or a cosmology, it is referring to the study of the preceding concept. So life, soul, and space in those three examples. Logos can also mean kind of the spoken word, a dialogue, a discussion between people. And so it's a fitting word to describe the video format in particular. All right, there are different ways to pronunciate or pronounce each of these words. So if you'll humor me, this is a little bit of a rant on pronunciation. So this is a method that there are methods that echo the authentic Latin. There are ways in which you can pronunciate the words in Warhammer according to like a Latin speaker historically. And then there's the way that the average gamer might pronunciate these words, right? And if a word looks like Latin but actually isn't, it really does raise some questions on how they should be pronounced. So I sit here as a dual citizen of Canada and the UK, living in the US, and I'm very aware that there are different ways to pronunciate even basic English words, right? The long or short A makes a huge difference in sound. Think of the car company Mazda or Mazda, whether you eat a pasta or pasta, even words like a process or process, or even pronunciation or pronunciation itself. Right? There are subtle ways in which you can pronunciate each of these words. But here's the simple truth. Pronunciation is a game that people play to appear intelligent or to save face. Right? There are rules and kind of proper ways to pronounce specific words, but they change depending on the social context. And the only true metric for success here is if the audience you're speaking to understands your meaning. Right? If no one understands what you're talking about, that's bad. But otherwise, pronunciation is based entirely on context. Right? I will not pay a cost if I mispronounce a word of Latin to an audience that doesn't know Latin. Right? I will pay a very high social cost if I mispronounce a word of Latin while I'm presenting a paper at a conference to a group of classicists. Now think of the brand Nike, right? I know a lot of people that pronounce it as Nike, but they're likely unaware that this is a reference to the goddess of victory, and it should be pronounced more closer to a Nike. In Canada, I would be penalized if I wrote a paper and my American spell check program removed the U in words like honor or color. And then when I moved to the United States, I was penalized for keeping the U. Right? There are many common Latin words used today that are no longer pronounced according to the linguistic rules of Latin. So think of the abbreviation like etc., right, instead of et cetera. Think of Julius Caesar instead of something like Julius Caesar. Think of Augustus instead of Augustus, right? Even those rules are only valid within a very small and specific timeline in history. Classical Latin is not the same as ecclesiastic Latin. Different times within the Roman world had different vowels, different letters, and different spellings. Okay? So this is a mess even in the original languages. So when you study some of the large seismic changes in language, like the great vowel shift in English, linguists cannot tell you why that happened. There's no reason on the basis of language why that had to occur. It's basically just a breakdown in norms and education that are enforcing those types of social rules. But there is no independent reason why it happened. The truth of pronunciation matters only to the context of your audience. Can you adapt your speech to pay the lowest social cost or to appear the most intelligent at any given time? It's really just simply a metric for social intelligence. So I've heard some people say they aren't good at pronunciation. Honestly, it's not surprising given our multi-layered culture and the globalized world in which we live. but don't sweat it. So when it comes to Warhammer, it doesn't really matter if you pronounce Tzeentch with a T, or if you pronounce demon as daimon or daemon. Honestly, it just depends if your listeners actually care. My point is that you see a lot of Warhammer players skip over specific words when they're reading from a story, because Age of Sigmar and 40k have lots of strange, exotic words. And my wife does that when she encounters kind of a Greek name when we're reading history and philosophy together. It's a common thing people do. But if you're in class and you pronounce Guta as Goth, you'll be laughed at. I've witnessed it. But I don't know how you possibly learn the use of the umlaut in German without either first making the mistake or mimicking someone else. Right? It's an association of the word with the sound. And, it's just not intuitive otherwise. So I know it can be difficult, but try not to worry too much about it. So that's my long rant on pronunciation. I will always try to work in such a way that you understand what I'm talking about, but there are multiple ways in which you can do this. Okay, so these upcoming videos will likely lean a little more towards 40k, because that game does use a lot of different languages, but there's definitely some space to explore in Age of Sigmar with language too. So thank you for listening. I will see you in the upcoming videos. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Please consider supporting the channel by commenting on the video, hitting that little like button, and subscribing for more Warhammer content.